While we're out here, while we're waiting, anyone want to do introductions with the audience so we all know who each other is? I can go first. I'm Becky. I'm one of the co-moderators today. I'm a member of the bloggers. My blog is Compendium. I've been blogging for 5 years as of this year, and I love it. And I'm so grateful for this group and community. We will go this way. Sure. Yeah.
I'm Jill. I'm a blogger at Cherry and Spoon.
I'm Carol. I'm a blogger at Minnesota Theater Love.
I'm Kendra. My blog is Artfully Engaging.
I'm Laura, and my blog is Twin Cities Stages.
I'm Kit. I write for 3 blogs, Talking Broadway, and Twin Cities Arts Reader, and Twin Cities Jewfolk.
I'm Gina Musto, and I blog at The Room Where It Happens.
I'm Marcel, she, her. I am speaking on the panel.
And I'm Claire, she, her, also speaking on the panel, work with 20% Theater.
Chavarria, he, him, known as the Big A Mexican, type friends, speaking at the panel.
I'm Trish Kirk, I work at Jopley.
Amanda. I work as an actress and theater educator in Texas.
I'm Craig Johnson. I work as an actor and a director.
We're doing introductions and you just walked in.
My name is Nick Mensiver. I'm an actor in town, and I'm also the board chair for the Community Theater Circle.
Oh, awesome.
Nice to see you all.
Hello.
Cool. We've got a few more minutes so we can keep chatting.
Is there anybody in there? Or do we? Is there anybody connected?
We didn't get that witchy.
No, it's just basically, it's a microphone hooked up to GarageBand.
Got it. Yeah, so actually you guys
I have this
did it
very
as
microphone,
we,
I think.
We've been trying to record these and put them online, so if anyone feels uncomfortable with that, let us know. But we want to try to share this because schedules are difficult. We know not everybody can make it, so.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
I'm gonna take one of these in advance.
So we did some introductions just now. Would you both like to introduce yourselves?
I'm Maureen.
My name's Chair.
We have 1 minute left. Do we want to start?
Yeah, that would be great.
Whoa. All right.
I'm gonna be taking notes on my phone. I'm not
That's fine.
texting or being.
Yeah, and we didn't put our hashtag signs up, but we have a hashtag TCTV Convo. So if you guys want to live tweet or take Instagram stories, or we're social media people, we encourage sharing, so feel free to do that as well. And we did.
I'm changing it.
Who knows? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Bree. That's okay. She, her pronouns. Yeah.
Do we hit the 7? We hit the 7. Okay. So we did introductions. Thank you all for coming. People might come in, that's fine. We keep this really informal. So we say conversation, we mean it. We have some pre-scripted questions, Gina and I, so we're planning to run through those. But if you have an actual follow-up to something, feel free. We'll also leave time at the end for you guys to ask questions if you want. So it's just up to you how you want it to proceed. We do ask people to be respectful, of course, and we're talking about difficult topics, so just please keep that in mind and try to be kind with whatever you ask. So, the history of this, I think several of you have come to these before, but just so you know, the bloggers as a group have been working to try to raise the profile of theater in the Twin Cities and Minnesota at large, and so we started these conversations as a way to feel more proactive about things that we notice in all of the plays that we see, because we see a lot of things, and there's often things that trouble us or that we wish could be better, and rather than writing a review and complaining about it, we want to try to create a space that we can all find solutions to those problems. So that's what this is for, to help generate ideas and help all of us to do our work better and to be a more inclusive community. So We did introductions and we talked about social media and the recording. So for those of you who just walked in, we are recording this, so just so you know, it will be going online. And if anyone has issues with that, just let us know. But that's the plan. So I'd like to start with all of you. I know many of you are new to me and probably others in the audience. So could you please describe a little bit more about your past? How did you get into theater? Just describe where you're at, what you're doing, and how you got there.
I'm Marcel. I work as a burlesque artist and a theater artist. I'm a board member with 20% Theater Company. I've worked with live action set, choreographed for Mission Theater Company. I've workshopped a few times with Sabbath Umbrella. I am a 2016 Queertopia artist, a 2017 Queer Stage artist. I do some outreach work for Patrick's Cabaret, some production work for Outspoken, a local queer open mic. And I work as a burlesque artist and the host, one of the co-producers and headliner of Daddy, a monthly queer variety show at the Ice House. I perform regularly with Black Hearts Burlesque at Lush and various cabaret reviews in the Twin Cities.
Covered the whole lot.
Sweet. So again, I'm Claire. I'm the founder and executive director of 20% Theater Company. We just started our 12th season, which is crazy to think about. I am from both coasts. I was born in California and mostly raised in Massachusetts, and went to a women's college where a lot of my friends were transitioning and entering as female, transitioning and leaving as male or non-binary. And some of them were theater artists, some of them were incredible playwrights who became very dear friends. And so my passion for their stories and their opportunities to live on and exist at all in theater just exploded, and it became something I felt I just had to work with and help and create opportunities and spaces and things like that. So I was out there in Western Mass for a couple years after college and kind of exhausted all the theater opportunities that were there. And originally came here for theater education because I thought that teaching teenagers was my path. And I still love them, but it lasted just a few short years. So I started 20% a year after moving here, and this is the third 20% Theater Company. I don't know if people know that there are two others. One, the first, was started by a Smith College alum of mine, who, in direct response to this study from 2002 that was released, about roughly 20% of professionals in theater were women. And so her mission and goal was obviously to work on that, fixing that, changing that, more equity. And then she also had a focus, because she came from the same school, on equity and opportunity for trans artists as well in theater. And then the second company is in Chicago. They're starting their 15th season, and also started by friends of mine from college. And then a couple years later, I asked for permission to use the name and started 20% here, and was given that. The one in New York retired a number of years ago because it's impossible to make theater in New York. But we are thrilled to, continue to make work and create space. Here.
I'm Hector Chavarria. I'm originally from El Paso, Texas, and I actually started my career wanting to be an actor, and I tried that for a little bit and it didn't really, work out as planned. I'm not on Broadway, so But as I started acting and just working in this profession, I came to realize that there was a lack of the queer Latino voice in the theater industry in general. So eventually I became a performance artist, and I developed and became the Big Gay Mexican, which is, it's done fantastic. It's a way to get the queer Latino voice out. I'm a playwright, I'm a performance artist, I'm a dancer, and I've done really well. I've performed at Mixed Blood, I've performed at the Walker. I performed with 20% Theater. It's great. In 2016, this past summer, I was in Cretopia, and I've just performed various pieces throughout the Twin Cities, and it's going well. So I'm happy to be part of this discussion.
Yes, thank you all for coming. I don't think I said that already. It was a given, but I want to say that.
Sure.
Gina, you want to?
Yeah, so our next question then is, how does your gender identity influence the roles you are offered and audition for, or does it not affect it? And what kind of things do you consider when choosing a project to work on?
Oh boy. Oh, let's dig in. How does my gender identity influence the work that I seek and get, essentially? Is that?
Yeah.
I moved here 3 years ago, sold all of my wares, moved here, was sleeping in a car, and wanted to be an actor. Was in the closet, hadn't come out as trans, had gone back in the closet, and had my little suitcase, and was walking from the Southern to Theater in the Round to the Guthrie to wherever, auditioning, and not really getting parts, not really identifying with the parts I was getting, was playing deputies and yeah, oh my gosh, doing dinner theater in Isanti, working at, doing St. Cloud show, like, just not my bag. And coming out is a weird catch-22 because it opened up doors for me, because I am trained, and because I am skilled, and because I am passionate, I can do the work, but it also means now that I am cast either as trans people or my transness is not a part of the conversation. And what do I want? What is good for the community? What is good for me and my career? How do I uphold those values simultaneously? There's work that I don't pursue because I don't feel safe in that space, or I don't feel like that's a company that I've heard good things about or that I've seen represent themselves well in the public. If I see that work is historically white or historically erasive of the queer experience, if I see that there's a lot of shows about women, but they're all cis white women, I'm less inclined to go and audition for that work. And there's a lot of oppression hierarchy stuff, I think, jump in at any point. There was a company that did a production of Midsummer where it was we're making these characters men, but we don't want to take away from the women in this city, so we're making these characters women. And it was okay, well, what does that binary approach to this work, which you're approaching as like a gay man, what does that say about transness, and where do I fit in? This should be a thing that I feel more invited to, but I actually feel less invited to participate because of the very binary way that you presented the perceived homophobia that you found in your interpretation of Midsummer, because that's also what we need. It's a lot. There's a lot of factors for me.
I don't audition. How do I answer this question?
Well, when I would audition, I was always getting the gay characters. I was always the flamboyant gay man, which for me, I actually didn't mind. And the only reason is because there was a lack of those characters to begin with. Mm-hmm. I remember in college, I had a film professor who was queer, who got mad at me because I was playing my third queer character in his class, and he finally told me, he's like, "Are you tired of playing the gay man?" And I told him, no, because how many gay characters do you see? So I will be more than happy to play the gay man as long as the gay man is visible in this industry. But I just feel that now I kind of stopped auditioning just because what I noticed is the queer characters in the bigger companies they're kind of offensive to me. It was always, the gay character was always very stereotypical, always played by a cis straight person, which I'm not saying that only queer actors can play queer characters. It's just they always come off as a caricature. I just feel like most straight actors that are playing gay characters aren't really doing the actual research on the character. So I just started writing my own stuff and casting myself in my own shows and bringing the big gay Mexican voice out there.
So I want to, we skipped over a little bit in terms of how you guys got here. You kind of alluded to this, but talk a little bit more about why did you go into theater? Like what inspired you? Was it that lack of not feeling seen? Was it the opportunity to be someone else? Like what inspired you? And maybe talk a little bit, I think all of you are creating your own work too, which is an interesting theme that came out of our conversation with women in theater as well. And I have a feeling there's probably some threads there that are similar, but talk about that a little bit.
I've always been obsessed with theater. My mom said that I came out of the womb like singing. It's always been a passion of mine, and the reason why I do it is to let my voice be heard, because for me it's not just the queer voice, it's also the Latinx voice that we are lacking. So that's why I don't stop. And yeah, we'll see. One day there will be a place for me.
A place called home.
A place called home. A wonderful world we call theater.
I think the reasons that I do it now are wildly different than the reasons that I started. I wanted to be Liza Minnelli. And then I wanted to be Ben Vereen, and then I wanted to be Bob Fosse. Right? Like that was the journey that I went down when I was like 10 years old. I went to see Chicago in Razzle Dazzle. I was in the balcony and red paillettes fell, and it looked like I could reach out and touch them. And that was the moment I was like, I'm gonna do this for the rest of my life. This is magic. And in that moment, I escaped. I escaped the abhorrent abuse I was experiencing in the home. I escaped the abhorrent abuse I was experiencing from the school system. I grew up in South Texas. I am mixed race, I am Latina and Black, and that is an adventure. Adding being trans on top of that, being a transgender lesbian on top of that, it's a whole can of worms. And it started out as an escape. You know, I was dancing, I was singing, I was in the choir, I was in the church choir, I was in a gospel choir at my Christian school, and was doing the plays, Wizard of Oz and that sort of thing. And then, for a little while, it was how I fed myself, you know? I was doing Hairspray and that whole bit. And to go back to the first question, like how do you pick work? When I was young, an older actor told me about the triangle, like money, integrity, and career enhancement, right? And how you needed to have like one of those things or some combination of those things to accept a job. And I try to live by, my version of that is like the 90-degree rule. Like if there's 180 degrees attainable in that triangle, even if I reach the full 60 degrees on money or career or whatever, like there still needs to be an additional 30 coming from somewhere else. And that became, the older I got, the more experiences I had, and the smarter I got, the harder that became. And that's we're navigating, yeah.
How about you?
I was not a theater my whole life kid. I just had a friend in sophomore year of high school, I think, like begged me to be an extra in a play where I literally had to walk on and then walk off. And no line, there was like a voiceover. It was artistic. And but there was something about it that I fell in love with. And then so I did every play since that moment through graduating high school, and then went to college knowing that I would major in theater. I just knew. But I also had this big picture and prior to theater life experience that just kind of floated me and told me like, acting might not be the thing, but whatever it is, like you're in love with this industry and you will learn everything you possibly can and you will make it work. And I had the luxury at this particular school of learning every single thing I possibly could. I stage managed and I set designed and I learned how to sound design and I production managed and I ran the box office and I learned everything about marketing and PR and all this stuff that has led to the success of 20% theater, I would say. And then in my directing classes is where I like to say the glitter fell from the sky and it was like this aha, I like all the other things, I'm good at most of the other things, but this is the thing that makes my heart explode, so I'm gonna keep doing this. And that's, yeah.
And at some point, for me, maybe this happened for you, either of you, but it became a necessity.
Yep.
When you get messages in your inbox, when people come up to you and they say, oh my God, I'm a trans person, I just moved here from Iowa, I'm a person, the only other black person in the room, thank you for your performance, thank you for being here, people come, they give you their money, they give you their hearts, they give you their tears, and it compels you to continue and to push further.
Mm-hmm.
I studied mime as a child, and I tell this story, I do a performance about this. I studied mime as a child, and it was, for me, the epitome of my love of physical theater and my white envy, my desire to be white, and it was such an accessible art form for me in that way. And I was working in a small town as a young adult and performed a corporeal piece. And the director of the venue later at an after party told me to keep my white face, anti-military, racist bullshit off his stage. And to think that simply because of the color of my skin, this owner of a theater, shall remain nameless, thought that what I was doing was somehow racism, was not simply Decru, not simply Lecoq or Marcel were the things that I had dedicated years of my life studying and wanted to share with an audience at 11 o'clock on a Friday night at a bar. That's a different subject. The point is, that conflict for me surmises so much of the difficulties of being an other artist, an artist working as an other, specifically in the state of Minnesota, which is a very educated state, a very liberal state, a very eloquent state, but also we have the receipts, we have the statistics, we have the numbers,
I think that's a good segue.
Yeah,
for
that's
you.
a great segue for the next question. This is one that comes from me. For those of you who don't know me, I identify as bisexual, and I recently had a very uncomfortable experience in a theater watching a show, and an audience was laughing at what seemed to be a joke about homophobia or homosexuals and saying, why is somebody acting that way? How can you tell if they're gay? And it was a very awkward situation for me, and I was wondering what the dangers are of assuming that theater is always a safe space for people who are queer, or especially queer people of color, and what the issues are. In high school, I always remember that's where it was just assumed that if you were gay, you did theater because that was where you hung out, that's where your place was, it was safe there. And I feel like some of that continues on, and people just assume all theater is safe, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're striving as a community to move away from the concept of safe as a space. It's not a thing, it doesn't exist. There is safer space. I think that we can work towards providing a safer space. And I think that there are a lot of companies who either, it has been my experience, use that language but are not presenting that experience, or are simply not interested in providing that experience. I have been a part of the production team of major international festivals where prominent venues here in the Twin Cities have refused to make their single-stall bathrooms gender neutral. Just because it's not in the contract. It's just not in the contract. Going back to what you're talking about specifically, that moment of being confronted with homophobia, I think that is a big problem. I went and saw something at the Guthrie a couple of years ago and left it intermission because I was like, I'm not gonna it was called Love Show or Love Seat or something like that, and it was full of this subtle homophobia, this dog whistly, let's laugh at men being effeminate, or let's laugh at women being masculine. It implies some sort of homosexuality, and that is funny. And this happens even in queer theater. You know, we start to play oppression Olympics at each other.
We really do, actually. That's, there was one show that I did, and I mean, now I do regret it. This was a couple years ago, where I played a trans character, and the company came up to me because the trans character was Latino, so they couldn't find a Latino trans man to play the part, which, yeah, that's the struggle, and that's the excuse.
I get very angry.
Yeah, well,
obviously.
yeah.
I'm not mad at you.
Well,
I'm
no.
just saying.
No, I mean,
you send people resources,
right.
you send
I
names.
understand, and I think because with this company, it was like, well, I mean, you're queer, so, you know.
Close enough,
right? And I mean, I do regret doing the show because I wasn't trans. I do appreciate, though, that this company, though, did bring this story, you know, to an audience, because it was a story about a queer trans man, and it was actually a really good monologue that I read. And the thing that hurt, though, is that people came up to me afterwards and were telling me that they really appreciated it, and they asked me, oh, was this about you? And, you know, telling them, no, I'm not trans was, you know, was kind of hard for me to say, but it's just one of those things where they just, you know, queer companies, you know, just assume, oh, well, you're queer, you're in theater, it's fine.
And then what do? It's your job then to assess the risk
Right.
and reward of, is this a story that is useful? Claire and I work together frequently, and we just finished a play that was a beautiful play that I was so happy to be a part of. I didn't necessarily agree with everything that was presented, but I felt like it was a show that was necessary to be seen, and that the audiences that were seeing it would benefit from that experience. And I think it was a very successful show. But you have to make a choice. You're confronted with, do I support something that I don't necessarily agree with just so that it can happen? Or do I say no and run the risk of someone perhaps even less, who identifies less with this character, or
Right.
assistant directing the show or choreographing the show or whatever, even less than I do, put it in their hands, let them take the reins and run amok with something at least I know something about. But you do what you can to defer to the appropriate artist. But
I also do want to, with this subject, going back to the subject, I do want to point out that working in a theater doesn't mean that you're safe from homophobia. Only reason I say this because I do work at the Guthrie Theater, and I actually am the leader of the LGBTQ affinity group there. And so once a month, whoever wants to gets together, and we talk about issues within our Guthrie community of queer people working there. And talking to some of my colleagues who don't identify as queer, two of them have come up to me on separate occasions telling me, I think it's weird to me that there's an affinity group for LGBTQ because we work in a theater. So, it's okay, we're all okay with this. And, plus most people in theater are gay anyway. And that's the one thing that's, for me, it's like, well, working at the Guthrie, I'm one of maybe 20% of the people that work at the Guthrie are queer. So, this affinity group is important because not everybody is queer that works in the theater, and not everybody is okay with queerness in the theater.
if it was, the shit show that is Kevin Spacey would not be happening.
Right. Yeah.
Topical insert for the evening.
Yeah, so that is a good segue too. You've touched on this a little bit already, but how do you feel about cis actors playing queer roles? Or in any iteration, I think you spoke really beautifully to this just now already, but is there such a thing as a pure part? anybody truly embodies something? Where's the line? Is there a line that should be drawn with who should or should not play certain things? Or is it about the tone of the show? You know, speak to that maybe.
Well, so in terms of trans characters should be played by trans people. With cis queer characters, I'm on the fence just because with sexuality, I feel that there's no gender in sexuality. Sexuality is fluid. It's just if a straight actor is portraying a queer character, then I would at least hope that they do the research and not make this character a caricature or just a joke.
The performance speaks volumes.
Right, exactly.
I think like as a director, it's really, really, that is the biggest piece. Yes, no trans characters not played by trans actors, ever. And, you know, just like I wouldn't cast a black character not as a black person, like I just wouldn't do it. Why would you do that? In terms of the sexuality piece, I think it's preferable. I actually directed a play that someone over there was in a couple of years ago that was about queer femme identity, which is a very invisible identity in the queer community, and it was really important to me that I tried really, really hard to get queer femmes to audition and to be there, and was like crossed all my fingers and toes that at least like my few leads would be that identity, and they were. There were some supporting actors that were not, but they did the research. We had like deep conversations in rehearsal. They had fellow performers of the identity that they could learn from, and so I felt that it was okay. But it's hard. It's really hard. And I think like you mentioned earlier with the gay male characters often being played by straight men, and I think that it's really like the job of the director to be as sensitive as they possibly can be, and to not, unless it's the point, with some really bad theater, musical theater, to make it a horrible caricature, to not let it get that there.
Yeah, there's context, there's a history, there's a history of oppression here. There's an entire history of artists who have died because they were not allowed to be out. And I think that when we're talking about straight actors playing gay characters or cis actors playing trans characters, we're talking about that history. And we can say all we want about where we are now, but it was not that long ago. It was not that long ago that you could not be gay and work on a large scale in Hollywood and have it not be about being gay. Doing the play right now, and there is a genital-specific line, and so we went to the author and asked for rewrites, and the author said yes, and then we talked about what that said about this character, how if this character is the only trans character in the play and is a pretty shitty character, what does that say about representation? So then now I am playing this character as a cis woman for the sake of not being a villain in this play and being the only trans person in this play. So those are my options, right? Those are my options. It's either to be true to my identity and to misrepresent my community, or to lie about my identity, and because the character doesn't need to be a cisgendered woman. There's nothing in the text that suggests that it has to be this way, other than the fact that I'm the only trans person in the show and she's a shitty character. So you have one black woman, one trans black woman in your show, and she's the evil queen. You know, like it. But then also, I'm grateful to be seen. I'm grateful that someone in the audience is going to see me and go, I can do this. I can work as an actor professionally at a nice venue, respected, not in danger, with a community of artists that is dedicated to intersectionality in the community and has shown that time and time again.
And getting paid.
And getting paid, I would say, a livable wage. Getting paid comparably really well. Yeah. But it's still, it's like, these are the choices. Would that I could not have to think about that when reading my lines and deciding who I want this character to be.
Yeah, that's actually a good segue to our next question. When I
Killing
was
the segues. I read them.
Absolutely. So when I was sitting in Rent last spring, I think it was here, realized that Maureen was the only bisexual character I'd ever seen on stage, and was a little terrified that that's the best representation we have of bisexuality going on here. What do you do with this character who's kind of terrible? So question is, how often have you seen someone who represents yourself on stage, whether that's gender, sexuality, race, all of them?
This question I thought about a lot because
This question is why 20% theater exists. Because people don't see themselves enough. And so the work that we produce and choose to make or do is solely for that reason. Just so that because I mean, you think about like the shows you were just in, the show you're in now, The Naked Eye, which is coming up, which is monologue scenes.
Was Andrea Jenkins in Q Stage a couple of years ago?
Yep.
That is one of the examples that I would cite.
Because you came
what's
to
one of
see
the
it,
first times I
you
saw
saw
myself.
her.
Yep.
Yeah, and pretty much after every show we do, I get at least half a dozen emails, anywhere from a day to a month out from the show being over, from someone being grateful that they saw themselves in theater for the first time. So I just had to say that.
Yeah.
Because it's really fucking important.
There are companies that are doing the work of visibility, and visibility is really important. I went with a bunch of artists to go see Moonlight, and we got into a heated debate about Brokeback Mountain and Will and Grace. And like for me, as hard as it is and shitty as it is, I think that it is important to recognize that progressives are progressives. You know, lest we forget that if you find yourself suddenly surrounded by the majority, you're no longer a progressive. You're now a Democrat. You're on the party line. Like, once everyone catches up with you, it's time to think, what's the next thing? And if you're surrounded by support and like-minded individuals, it's hard for that to happen. And we do have that incubator sort of happening in the like liberal, intellectual, internet complacency, world right now. Will and Grace was important. Will and Grace was useful. Will and Grace saved my life. I tried to watch it again as an adult and it was garbage and I couldn't watch it. But 11-year-old me needed that. I needed it. And I would say that without Brokeback Mountain, we wouldn't have Moonlight. And is that shitty? Yes. And this was Rika. If Rika hears this, is gonna hate me for saying this. Just not here for this. And maybe I'm not being as radical as I should be. But I don't think that we realistically, practically are going to say, hello, world of cis, straight, white men who has had everything for so long. We would like all of our rights and we would like them right now, and we're not gonna, that's it. It's literally just not gonna happen. We see that. We're in this Lion in Winter moment right now. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the people who did the work before, as shitty as they may have been. I'm grateful for Gloria Steinem and the terrible things that she has said, like, would not have what we have today without it.
To answer the question, it's rare that I do see myself represented, because as you've been mentioning, like we are progressing, which is amazing, and I really appreciate the fact that there's a lot more queerness in theater, like actual queerness in theater. But for me, the problem is I'm noticing is that most of the theater that's happening isn't really meant for me. It's meant for a queer person, but it's meant for a queer white person. Mm-hmm. There is the lack of the queer POC voice, the lack of the queer POC presence.
Even in drag, even in burlesque,
everywhere.
even in queer performance art. This is not just a main stage proscenium problem.
Right. It's an issue everywhere, and again, we are progressing. It's just I feel like once again, like the POC people are being represented very little. We're getting there.
And it's
but-
hard when you feel like you have to leave something.
Right. Well, it's also hard performing as the big gay Mexican, having to, like, I turn myself into, like, or trying to become, like, a role model for people, and it's also just really hard, because that's a big...
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
It's a big job.
And people
What if I mess
challenge
up, you know?
Yeah. And how audacious of you as a brown person, as a queer person, to put yourself on that pedestal.
Right.
To make yourself a role model and a voice for people that need a voice and a role model. Like, how dare you?
Right, exactly. And I do feel that way sometimes, but, you know, I'm doing what I can.
Yeah.
You know? And I'm in hopes that other people believe that they can do it too, and then they do it for themselves, and they do it as well, and more people are seeing.
What I see is that we are more inclined, women, queer people, artists of color, are more inclined to question that. To question the bravado and the audacity that it takes to put yourself in that position, to be a role model, to head a company. We are much more willing to ask ourselves that than perhaps someone who has been encouraged their entire career.
Right, exactly.
Or who has not faced the same hurdles that we have faced to receive whatever levels of success that we have achieved.
Right.
Yeah, so I want to just quick say, because I forgot earlier, if anyone needs a bathroom, there's one downstairs. So feel free to use it at any time, because we don't have planned breaks. But then going off of this, if you could change one thing about the way you see queer people portrayed in theater, I mean, there's probably a lot of things, but is there one overarching theme that you would change? Like, if you think there's one thing you could fix that would really help with making things feel a little more accurate or honest or respectful, what might that be?
A man in a dress isn't funny.
Oh my gosh, what year is it?
Like that, I mean, yeah, it's like 2017 and it's still funny, you know?
There's still so much gender essentialism. So many of the conversations happening are still rooted in binary. It is hard to challenge discourse. It is my dream that we see queer characters in plays where nothing gay necessarily happens. Nobody dies. It's not about I worked so hard to fight this. What's that shitty movie about where Jennifer Lawrence makes a vacuum and won an Oscar because she made a vacuum?
Joy,
I want that, but about a trans woman of color. You will not see that in the next 25 years. I promise you. That's not going to be a major Hollywood blockbuster.
Right.
Unless it's about how she fought HIV or some shit, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say the plays. I mean, we have come a long way, and we did need the what I call the Trans 101 plays. They needed to exist, but I think we're past that. And the people who still need those plays can figure out a way to see those plays. But I want the plays where the queer and trans characters. That's just who they fucking are. You have blonde hair. Who cares? We're just people.
Yeah.
And we can deal with an issue, and we're all humans, and we have emotions, and there's other things happening, and it doesn't have to be about that. And like you said, it doesn't have to be a tragedy. It doesn't have to be a coming out story. It doesn't have to be yeah. So those are the plays that I want more of.
And I think companies, I want to see a commitment from companies not to perpetuate systems of oppression. How heartbreaking. When I was 16 and at Chaska High School, an actor friend of mine drove to Minneapolis to see Michelle-Mobama in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. The play changed my life. I was an LB diehard and thought I was so smart, and talked to Michelle after, she's from Chaska, whatever, and remember when Albie died, and I remember crying because he died, and then reading an article about how he doesn't let black people perform in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. It is in his estate that black people are not allowed to perform in Virginia Woolf. So here I had been for the past 10 years looking up to this performance, to this show, this great Bane Belky production of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf that was just riveting and life-changing for a young artist that I could never be in. Could never be a part of that. And same, and then the mammoth died and some other shit occurred too, and it was like, who I don't get to have. All of the plays that I read in school, all of the things that like me and my friends were into, surprise, they're all shitty.
My obsession for years and the reason why I do theaters was Hype Story.
Ay, ay, ay.
Yeah.
I was a jet. You Snowboy, you're too dark to pass. That was my line. Sorry, go on. Yes, West Side Story.
It's one of those things you guys say more. You know, like, so I mean, it's hard because I still love it. It's just there's something about it that I love it, but just growing up realizing why the play was written the way it was just very. It's
Just
very
to say, it was created by 4 gay men, some of whom were in the closet at the time and went through tremendous struggles, and Jerome Robbins and to.
Would you question that anybody's character, like poor character?
Yeah.
So I'm going to interrupt the flow a little bit because I had a follow-up that just sparked based on one of our other conversations that I thought was the very first one we ever had, actually. I'm going to keep studying this every time because I just think he's so insightful, but Rick Shiomi was here. And we had this conversation about these vaunted plays like Miss Saigon, for example, right? That are very problematic, but have this legacy. And so the question was asked, should we throw them out? Or is there a way that we can do these that change them, that makes them more respectable? He had this really fascinating answer about The King and I and the fact that the character of Anna was actually in real life half Thai, which many people don't know. And so when he did a production, he brought that actual history back into it and then completely changed the context of the entire show just because he did his research. So I'm curious, based on that, how do you feel about
Why?
this?
To what end?
Right.
How much time and work do we need to spend justifying this material? We are capable of creating new relevant material.
There's
we are
so
artists.
much out there that
Like,
people just don't even pay any attention to.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, legacy, history, pre-internet theater that people hold on this huge pedestal, but
it's also made in a time when we couldn't be working.
Right.
When I didn't stand a chance. None of the people on this panel stood a chance.
That's kind of why one of my dreams, though, is to actually do a production of West Side Story and cast it. And I would cast it all Latino because it works. There'd be Puerto Ricans and there'd be like Mexicans.
Yeah.
And they'd be fighting against each other, but they're all Latino. So.
Anne Bogart did South Pacific, and it was about PTSD and like racial tension and like change a bunch of stuff, and I get conflicted about it, like Cinderella, or Romeo and Juliet. Every now and then they have a black Juliet, and it's like, oh my god, what's happening? I don't know. To what end, I guess, is my question. Why can't we let it go? It honestly reminds me of the Confederate statue situation. It really does. How badly will you cling to your heritage? Heritage for me is a dog whistle.
Actually, in all transparency, one of the reasons that I left teaching teenagers is that I was like politely asked to leave because the scenes that I wanted my teenagers to do were modern and real and like good new plays versus the old crap that was racist and oppressive and sexist and gross. And they made me leave. So it's like, because I'm sick of those pieces, and those pieces, again, being held on a pedestal for our youth to think is like, this is what theater should be, when the work that I was sharing with them, just so brilliant, are plays that are much more worth their time.
My high school did a production of The Crucible, and they thought they were so progressive, and I could not be in it, so they made me the dramaturg for the season.
Of course. Yeah.
To keep them quiet.
Yeah. It's a really tough question, and it's raging right now, right? All over the country, there's this huge debate over, particularly West Side Story is such a hot point in this community. It was last summer, and it's gonna come back this summer again too. So, it's something that we have to keep out there, right? So, thank you for sharing those thoughts. It's really complex. Do you want to jump back on the list since I sidewinded us
Yeah,
out
so
all
we
over
were-
elsewhere?
Yeah, so sort of an opposite to the last question we had about what you would change. What do you feel is the biggest sign of progress for representation of queer characters and queer people on stage?
The biggest sign of progress. I am a sucker for, this goes against so many things that I've said, but when I am scrolling through Facebook and I see someone post some video of people at like the MTV Video Music Awards being like, we stand with trans women and Teen Vogue and the protesters of Charlottesville, my little baby gay heart just like, I worry about my generation. I worry about my generation. I'm 25. And I worry a lot about what I see. I'm on the cusp of like the internet. I got a cell phone when I was like 14, you know? I'm losing focus, sorry.
It's okay.
What was the question?
Biggest sign of progress for portrayal of queer characters and queer people.
I mean, I wish they all were, but
Yeah.
just the fact that some trans and queer characters are played by trans and queer people,
Yeah.
like, it's better than none. So, and that's become more and more, I think, just in the last half decade.
I would say because they won't say it themselves, but they are signs of progress. The
Yeah.
people who are right now.
Thank
All of
you.
you.
This is a sign of progress.
Yeah,
That this is
having
happening.
this opportunity. Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, I guess for me, it's just, I mean, I am happy to see that there's more queer things happening in theater and in Hollywood. It's just, I mean, it's baby steps.
One of my best friends, who I've worked with at my day job for almost 12 years, has a 5-year-old who just came out as trans, and or who has basically been living as a trans child for almost a year now. Just started kindergarten at a public school as their new identity, and she's an artist, and seeing her work. Mom is an artist. Seeing her work change over that year, is just an incredible sign. And seeing we are adorable. She knows the work I do. She's come to our shows. I go support her gallery exhibits all the time, and we send each other things like that, and things like this commercial for I don't even know what. That
Halloween commercial?
Is it that one?
Oh my god! I don't know what it was about. I didn't care.
With
But
the
these
kids.
white people are gonna make me cry.
Yeah, yep. Things like that. It's.
I mean, we have the musical Fun Home that came out that won a Tony.
Yeah.
So I mean, for me there are some issues that I have with it, but I mean,
It's okay. To each their own.
right? There's issues in it. But
The youth. I believe the children are the future. Treat
Yeah,
them well
totally.
and let them lead the way. These kids these days playing with gender. My housemate's 13-year-old sibling who is gender nonconforming and has 2 partners. Like, okay, they're gonna be fine. I think we're gonna be fine. It's hard work. It's an uphill battle, and we're continuing to fight. But I pay my bills. I am a working artist. I quit a very oppressive transphobic job 6 or 7 months ago, and I have not wanted for food or to pay my bills, or I have not borrowed money. That to me is a huge sign of progress. But there is that much work available in this city right now, accessible to me, who does not have a car. I'm not driving out to Waconia. It's here. Hey. you go where the work is.
So we sort of alluded to this, or I think we talked about this in a different way, and I'm hoping this kind of hits a different question, or a different answer. But what's the biggest struggle that you personally have faced? Is it that balance of feeling seen, making a choice about who you're portraying, or if you're being false to yourself, or what would you say as an artist in theater, what is the biggest struggle that you feel yourself having to overcome, or that you worry about, like what keeps you up at night?
What keeps me up at night, what gives me a panic attack walking into even a conversation like this, the pushback. Choosing my battles is a huge challenge for me. There are people that I work with regularly who are very prominent producers who provide me with a great deal of opportunity and foster my work, and some of the things that they do are grossly unacceptable. And if I say that, if I say that, the reward is perhaps creating a better future for someone else, but I also risk, I've been fired for speaking up, and had all kinds of vitriol said about me for speaking up.
Same.
You know, there are numbers that I've choreographed for big stars at the Minneapolis Burlesque Festival and received no credit, but the dog who was in the number is credited. Like, choosing my battles.
Well, for me, it's so what I did with the gay Mexican is I basically turned myself into a stereotype because that's the way to get people's attention. But for me, the fear is not to stay, not to live it and not to stay in people's minds as a stereotype. And also with my work, I mean, I deal with a lot of issues, and I just don't want to turn my work into like the victim plays that we see a lot in queer theater, that, you know, it's we're the victim, like, woe is me. Like, for me, I try my best to always add like a positive ending to my work, because I mean, I deal with not just my sexuality, my work deals with sexual assault, it deals with body shaming, you know, body positivity, a lot of issues that not just queer people face. Like, these are issues that, you know, everyone faces, well, not everyone, hopefully not, but, you know, not just queer people are dealing with. And for me, I just want to just, you know, I want to present this in a way that this could happen to anyone, you know.
But I think maybe you can speak to this as well, Hector, but I sometimes feel this sadness around, okay, so great, how inspiring that I am able to feed myself and even like go out and like get myself a new pair of shoes or whatever, you know, like how great that I am working, that I'm sustaining myself as an artist. But also the times that I bite my teeth, the things that I endure for this to happen, the positions that I put myself in, you know, being assaulted as you leave a venue, like, oh my goodness, you want to tell that story of hope and of success and of opportunity, but you also want people to know the sacrifices that you have to make and the blows that you have to take to get there.
Also, just walking out of your apartment or walking out of your home. Like, nowadays, that's what's kind of scary, especially after, you know, the election. Like, it's pretty worrisome, especially putting myself out there, you know, putting myself, you know, as like a, you know, as a public figure. It's pretty terrifying nowadays. I mean, there's that. My mom calls me every other week just worried. Even like today, she found out I was doing this panel and she was like, be careful when you leave. And I was like, Mom, don't worry. But then it's like, well, actually, no, that is kind of a legit fear, you know.
She's in Texas?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, she's in El Paso right now, I'm worried.
Yeah, so kind of turning things to a different, so the opposite. Was there a time when you felt fully supported as an artist and felt like you had everything you needed to be successful?
I regularly feel that way working with 20% theater.
Actually, same here.
Right,
I
right,
work with 20% theater.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on, especially for other people who might listen to this, what were some of those things? So how could another theater copy that for you? What are some takeaways people could use?
A willingness to act in the moment goes such a long way. There is, and I will share a specific anecdote to exemplify this. There's a company that I auditioned for. At the same time I was auditioning for 20%. There were conversations around how to like make it work to do both shows at the same time. Ultimately decided to go with 20% because of a very specific instance of racism that I experienced at a rehearsal for this other company that was not dealt with in the moment. And when I sent them the email explaining this to them, when they came to me later and said, hey, we would like to offer you the role, you know, and I said, look, this happened and I have been just sitting in it and I have not wanted to work with you since then. And also, like, let's look at your production photos and let's talk about the history of your work and what you're doing. You know, the work was written by a former company member who was a queer person of color. There were no people of color in the cast. I was like, what is going on? But also I didn't say yes to this project, so like, ugh. And their response was, yeah, we've been sitting in this too. We felt so bad. We're so sorry. We use that as an example in like future incidences and with other people. And like, I'm so glad. I'm so glad that that was a lovely little teaching moment for everybody. Mm-hmm. But at what expense? At my expense. So I don't want to go back there because it was not acted upon in the moment. When difficult things are brought up in the 20% rehearsal, they're dealt with in the moment, and if they're not dealt with in the moment, there are stopgaps in place so that if you feel unsafe, if you feel as though the director is not someone that you can speak to, there's a direct channel to the producer, there's a direct channel to board members, there's a direct channel to accountability. And that doesn't always exist. How do we make that work? How do we make that work when you're talking about devising, when you're talking about company work? How do we make that work when you're talking about large-scale commercial work? 20% does a really good job of that.
Claire, do you make a policy? Like, do you have a training with people when if they're new to 20%? Do you sit down with them? Do you have a process for that? Or is it just kind of understood?
It's a really good question. So, because I don't know. You know, I would say for a period of recent years, it seemed like we had this huge family, we were working with many of the same people, and occasionally there would be some new artists, but those new artists were still part of the queer community. So there was assumed safety and a shared lived experience. But with our current show and most recent show, there are a lot of new people involved. There's people we've never worked with before, never heard of before, that I was interviewing or auditioning or whatever. And it was scary. It was really scary to be like, okay, my instinct is telling me this person's gonna be great. And I am not assuming anything about their sexuality. They have, you know, I'm aware that they are a cis person, but I'm gonna go with my instinct. I'm gonna go with how great this interview was. And with interviews for a recent stage manager position, like the director and I did come out and ask, like, what is your experience with queer and trans artists? And one of the auditioners said those people a number of times. So I was like, nope. One of them had like a queer family member and a queer roommate in college and was very comfortable talking about it. And another one was like, oh, well, I'm queer and my best friend is trans and blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't favoritism, but like, it's like, okay, that's comforting. It's safer for the people that I'm going to now let you logistically manage for 2 months. Like, I need to trust that, like, your resume is stellar. That's awesome. You've got a ton of great stage management experience, but if you don't get gender identity stuff related to like how we do our work, if that's going to take 2 months for you to learn, it's not going to work.
It will get in the way.
It'll get in the way. So it's not that we don't have cis straight artists working with us, because we have many, but they have to be with it, and because we don't have the time. It's not our job to educate.
This was the moment that I experienced was, I can't remember the specifics, but someone had just been murdered. A black man had just been gunned down in the streets for no reason. And the officer who had done this had been was let go. This happens all the time in this country. If you don't know about it, look it up. And how. We did a check-in at the start of the rehearsal. One of the co-directors of this was a Black artist, and when it was like, let's check in, name, pronouns, how you feeling? And I was like, I'm not okay. I'm here to work. I showed up, but I'm not okay right now, and I want to like put that out there and let you know that like I showed up today and I'm gonna give it my all. I'm not here to cause a scene or be distracting, but like, you don't get to call in because racism. You don't get to call in because your people are being murdered for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the rehearsal, a white man who is in the company, who like works with this company all the time, was like, I'm so sick of everybody talking about their feelings and it gets in the way. We spend 25 minutes talking about all the sad things that are happening in the world. We have a show to do. Like, if you're mad that this rehearsal is being interrupted, you're mad at systematic oppression. But you're taking it out on me. Which is just, let me add it to my day.
Mm-hmm.
That person was not vetted. It had never been considered by the company that the person should need to be vetted because they were not prepared to work with me.
And I think that like, yes, there is big, huge theater or theater that rehearses in 2 weeks and like theater that's not emotional, that's not about identity, that's not about like lives. And that theater just, it's all good. I have no ill with that kind of theater. That's just not my theater. So the theater that we do, that we like to do, that we like to see, that we like to support, is the theater that will stop a rehearsal, like we did this summer with a show to address a major conflict with understanding of a character, and if that takes an hour away, it takes an hour away because it's important, and that's an artist involved in the show who's feeling very vulnerable, and you know, it's not a leave all your baggage at the door kind of thing. It's not going to be, and I wouldn't want that because then people aren't authentic.
How bizarre that came around at the same time as like the method.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to jump back up again because this sparked the thought in my mind with something that I think all of you have alluded to with pre-vetting. So if you look at the history of a company and you don't feel like the work has been of a certain caliber, has had a certain perspective or diversity, that you'll generally avoid it. What if there's a company that has done that, maybe they hire a new AD and they really want to turn the ship 180 degrees and they want to go, but then they're fighting that history. So what are some ways, how can they climb out of that? How can they do better if they really want to, if they want to fix it? What are some ways they could reach out or things that would feel proactive? How could they get that message out? How do they do that?
They have to do the work.
Yeah. And it's not just picking a play
Right.
that some people might like.
Well, I'm sorry, just to point something out, like, because I feel like that's what's happening is that I feel like some theater companies are just like checking boxes, like, oh, we have a gay play, we have a POC play, done, diversity, you know, and it's
They will come, people
they will come, yeah, and for me, I'm like, okay, great, fine, but you have to do the work though. Like, if you're gonna do these plays, then please do it right. And
On the subject of the checking off of boxes, on the subject of seasons and season tickets, I want to talk about this for a second. Because this, to me, is... Mamet talks about the season ticket being like the death of the American theater for his own reasons. I think it's the death of the American theater because of gentrification. Because who are the people that are season ticket holders? They're old white people and young people. I cannot afford season tickets to the Guthrie. I have been an art share member. I am considering purchasing a Walker membership at the moment. I would be a season ticket holder at somewhere like the Open Eye or the Red Eye or 20% or the Mixed Blood, but I, at this point, am not interested in being a season ticket holder at the Guthrie. And so then what happens? They continue to do the programming that they do. Because you have to keep the lights on at that giant place where the seats are all squished up next to each other. You gotta pay the bills. I get it, and thank you for the studio, and thank you for fostering work, and I've had great experiences at the Guthrie, and I think that there is something to be said about like trickle down work and the Broadway to small scale economy of theater. But the power is in the hands of the season ticket holders. And that is a dying generation.
I also think, like, in terms of this idea of you have to do the work, is it's not just, pick the play with the POC character and then send some emails to orgs in that POC community that's, represented in your play. But to actually make time to sit down and talk with people. And as a white, queer woman running a theater company that focuses a lot of our work on trans experience as a non-trans person, I'm still doing that work and I will never stop doing that work, and it is hard and it is painful, and I have been attacked and I have been told horrible things and I have been accused of horrible things, but I almost didn't give up because it's important to me. And I meet with people and I learn, and I will never stop trying to be a better ally. And I think that you have to care. You have to actually care and not just want to make a buck.
Just as your intention as a director is clear in a show, or your intention as an actor is clear in your performance, the intention of your making is apparent in the season, is apparent in the work. We know when we're being placated. Also, I understand that I'm not asking for every show to be the Colored Museum, or I don't want to be disrespected. I don't want to be disrespected. I don't want to be made a joke of. I don't want to be a side note. I don't want to just be unseen or unheard. I don't think that
there is a token.
Or there is a token. I get that not everybody in the world is a trans woman of color. I'm not saying everything has to be for everybody all the time. It would just be nice. It would just be nice
to be invited to the party.
Yeah, to be invited. I go out so much. I went to Kitten and Lou's performance of Holier Than Thou at Lush. I went to Jana Frank's Dream Channel at the Open Eye this weekend. Where else did we go? We went back to Lush for their drag competition. We went and saw some other piece of theater. I went to Sunny Park with George and In the Heights. I'm seeing a diverse array. This weekend, there was not a single other Black person in those audiences at those shows that I went to. There was an incident at one of them last weekend where I left the venue because I felt so disrespected by the transphobia that was happening on stage. And as I stood up to leave, I saw that I was the only Black person in the room and that I was leaving that sold out show. And it made me want to stay, just to be in the room. But this woman got on the stage that I perform on at least once a month and lifted her skirt to prove that she was a real woman. Because it can be very confusing with all of these chicks with dicks running around. And again, who at this gay bar did not vet this person?
Yeah, I do not know why that person was there.
Who allowed this to happen? There are so many people.
So bad.
And I know these people and I respect them and I work with them.
What happened?
But what? WTF? Because then there were no Black people in that room other than staff. And there were no other trans feminine people in that room except for maybe a couple of the drag queens. I don't know their identities.
Well, in terms of going back to theater, I think that's also kind of one of the struggles is where the majority of the audiences are rich old white people. So for me, the one thing that I've been kind of questioning my whole career is how do you get other audiences to come to see theater?
Yeah. And also, how do you talk about this without, I love rich old white people. I have so many rich old white people friends. Oh my God, my partner's parents are rich old white people and they're great. They're gonna pay for our wedding. I don't hate white people or hate old people or hate rich people. I just want to be able to talk about the demographics, the numbers, the statistics, the receipts and the facts that we have without it becoming this bombastic, fiery, sad thing where everybody feels like they want to cry and the air is just sucked out of the room because you said old rich white person. It's like a slur.
What's your problem?
It's used like a
Whole
slur though.
society.
Yeah.
It's used like a slur though, when you say old rich white people. Not you, lowercase, you know, but people will use it as a slur.
It can be,
It can be, it has been sometimes, and that's tricky. As I age, I think, I think I'm turning into,
Yeah.
you know, and I don't believe I'm rich, but it depends on what room you're in and who you're comparing yourselves to, and all of a sudden, I joke, I live in Seward, and I was like, man, neighbors are like so liberal. Oh no, I'm the conservative on the block. I'm not conservative, but it all depends on context.
Yeah.
And I'm living in that a lot. I have a big birthday coming up, and I think I'm thinking about that a lot, and who are we categorizing by age? I work at the Guthrie, and you know, the old rich white people I used to say, they both passed away. The Coles, John and Sage Coles, I knew them. Could you love them more? And I remind people that in their body, you look at them and they were rich, and identify them as old rich white people. They founded the theater at 35. John was like 35 when the Guthrie came to town. They were more representative of what this room looks like, except they came with a whole lot of privilege. You know, a whole lot of privilege.
Right.
But in terms of, like, did they ever really lose that mindset? I'm not sure they did if you knew them. You know, I think they always envisioned themselves, not envisioned, but acted in that same way. Generous and young and that I'm a marketer at the theater. You know, marketers put them in those demographics, and we often don't do service to them when we do that. So that's
I think
what
of
I'm
Miriam at Red Eye, who I gleaned so much from in the time that I worked with this old white lady, you know. How do we work together?
Yeah, exactly.
If I'm being perfectly honest, I spend more time talking to old rich white people than I do my own demographics. Sometimes our interests overlap more. You know, I don't really like to go out to the club dancing. Not to say that like older people don't want to go out dancing, but I want to do this. I mean, I think it's clear that I'm maybe the youngest person in the room, one of the young people in the room. I want to talk about this, you know? I want to go to the gay bar one more time. And
Yeah, the more I realize I'm closer to one of the older folks in the room, you know, when you have that, and you think, when did that happen?
yeah.
You know, and so when I think of our audience, I think of it that way, that there's gonna be a whole lot of people like me that are like, oh, when did I leap into that next box?
Yeah.
When did I become that older group and not the, you know, we have a young professionals group now, I'm like, I'm too old for it. I'm too old for a bunch of the programs that we have, you know, and you just, and again, I'm making this very personal, but it applies to my work as well, because I happen to be our average demographic.
Yeah.
I just happen to be at that moment in my life where except for that I'm gay, but beyond that, because I think the odds of that are slim, but that's our demo, but you know, those moments of when did that happen, and that most of them didn't start out that way, that they didn't start out, you know, if we go to a Wednesday matinee audience, Hector knows this, Kendra knows this, if we go to a Wednesday matinee audience, that's a whole other level of age, but they started going, and it's more representative of this room than not. And so that kind of trajectory of patrons' experience with any organization, really, with any theater, how do you make sure you're serving them, you're serving new?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, but the question of service, though, I feel like I have to say, when you're talking about serving that community and you're talking about serving this community, those are not really comparable, because you're not talking about protecting their safety. They're not in danger of being. I don't think that I have gone to the Guthrie and seen old rich white people being made just a sham and a mockery of, the way that I have trans people.
I understand what you're saying.
You know, like, the struggle that I have, I think that we probably agree on a lot of things. The struggle that I have is, how do I say the things that I'm saying without alienating you because you are in a position of power that is greater than mine. And that is related to our various demographics. You know? We went at the Open Eye, the show, those of you that know about Dream Channel or Jana's work, they separate you and you go and you're with a group of people that you don't know. And I had great conversations, stimulating, interesting conversations with a group of old rich white people who were lamenting the closing of the firehouse, the lack of space for Patrick's, and we talked about Ron Athey, and we talked about that whole business in the 80s, and we talked about intermedia, and we talked about Q Stage, and it was a beautiful, stimulating conversation. So again, when I say it, it's not that I think that old rich white people are the enemy. I think that old rich white people are a protected demographic. I think that old rich white people do not fear when they go to the Guthrie. They're not afraid.
Yeah. Yep.
They're not, fingers crossed, I just spent 80 of my coveted dollars. I really hope I don't get treated like shit. You know? I went and saw Pericles with my partner, and he had a nervous breakdown after that show. He cut it. Oh, it was bad. It was really bad. That's not gonna happen to an older white person when they go to Pericles.
Yeah.
You know?
And they're very likely to find themselves in an audience that looks just like them. And certainly in the past, more likely to see themselves on stage, you know.
All the time.
No question. And I really am not looking to be here to represent. I inherently represent the Guthrie when I talk, but I also see myself as a member of the gay community. I see myself as a woman. I see myself as a member of the theater community. I see myself as somebody who grew up here, and I've been an audience member at a lot of theaters in town for just a lot of years. And so I obviously can't disconnect from my Guthrie identity, but I also feel very connected to just a theater identity here.
Yeah. We forget that. We are part of a greater community.
Yeah.
We all are. And we need to be able to talk about these things. And
I didn't mean to cut off the conversation, but I'm personally fascinated by the grouping of audiences when we get to the talking about everybody does it. Everybody does it. Old rich white people, everybody does it. Everybody has that box. And how we talk about that and what does that mean and you know, it's just really on my mind right now.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here, and thank everybody. I mean, we're not done yet. We're talking, and I want to say, you know, I'm so glad that you said that because the Guthrie comes up every time we do this, and it's because it is the Titanic, right? It is the shining theater that anyone who's not from Minneapolis, who knows theater in Minneapolis, they think Guthrie.
They have a Tony.
They do, you know.
What did you say?
I said they have a Tony.
There's a reason there, you know, and it's like a blessing and a curse. Like there's resources, there's facilities, there's so much, but the burden is so much greater, right? Because you have those resources. I think people expect a lot. Not that that's unfair, but you know, I think it can feel one-sided sometimes, and I would say at least the audience question is something that I think all of us can agree. Every single theater in this community has that problem to some extent. And that relates to business. I'm really excited. One of the topics that we want to bring up in a future month is funding for theaters and ticket sales and grants and how do you have a healthy audience base? Because that is a very tricky question, and balancing your priorities with what you think your audience's priorities might be and helping to change things like we were talking about is difficult.
I just want to follow up just on one Guthrie thing. When I was growing up in St. Paul, when I got my driver's license, the very first place that I went was to the Guthrie Theater by myself to drive from East Side St. Paul over to Minneapolis. And it was to see Hamlet and to see Randall Duke Kim, an Asian American actor in Hamlet, and just loving it. And I got season tickets there because it was only $21 to do that, to get a whole season at the student rate in 1977. And it was the Michael Langham years, and they were wonderful. And that was the kind of theater I wanted to do. And so I've been privileged enough to be able to do that in a lot of different places too. So that's like, even though I certainly have my Guthrie gripes, who doesn't? You know, there's
Who
so many
doesn't?
shows.
That's a
Who
separate
doesn't?
meeting for me.
Of course.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to put that out there. It's just like how I, as sort of a gay teenager, went to go see an Asian American Hamlet at the Guthrie then too. And that was the first place that I drove to when I was able to. So, anyway, continue.
No, we're so lucky to have this legacy, and that's why, like I said earlier, that's why we want to have these conversations, because there's so much potential and there's so much great stuff that we want to celebrate too, not just point fingers.
Yeah.
So I think this is such a healthy conversation, and I'm so glad about this. And so going on that vein, talking about how we write ships, how do we do things behind the scenes? And I think, Claire, you could really talk about this. How do we hire stagehands and playwrights and lighting people and set designers and costume designers and makeup artists who are welcoming to the queer community? And where would you post job notices, or how do you run an interview? How do you vet those people? How do you create a team that's welcoming?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I have kind of an anecdotal recent story to share. Local company is producing a show this spring with a transgender character that will be played by a transgender actor. And the director, or producer, maybe both, emailed me on behalf of that production and said, hey, we're doing this thing with this character, blah, 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 like, we would love the whole production team to be queer or trans. Like, who do you guys work with? And so all these things happen. First, you're not stealing my people. Then I was like, okay, wait, no, I don't want to prevent my amazing artists from getting other work. So then I was like, get over it. But then I was like, wait, are you only interested in these artists because you're doing this one show? Because I don't want to give you names of people that you're not going to hire for your next show just because that one doesn't have anything to do with trans identity. You're just going to go back to your staple regulars. Like, that's not okay. So then it was like, how do I craft this response and say all of those things? Because that's a dilemma. So I'm not answering your question, but it made me think of it because that is the kind of thing I also get all the time. And it's really, really hard. And so I did, as tactfully as I could, say that I had this concern that I get approached a lot, especially for actors, where I take their info and I will pass it along to my amazing artists and say, here are these opportunities, here's what I know about them, like, you're on your own, but I'm not gonna take their sensitive information and pass it in some cases. And this person wrote back and they were like, I really respect your resistance, and that's not at all our intention. I appreciate you bringing it up. We intend to weave more LGBTQ artists into the fabric of this organization, and this is hopefully a good starting point. We do have a relationship with that theater already, 20% does, so they were like, this is why we reached out to you first, and so it became an amazing conversation, such as this. So that was awesome, and it did end up connecting them with some folks. But besides that random example, it's hard. We've worked for a very long time on what is the language that we put out there with job postings and audition postings, and just kind of a equal opportunity sort of statement, strongly encouraging, especially with auditions, trans and non-binary artists to audition for any role. That is crucial, and with directors that I'm hiring, that's a non-negotiable. You have to be willing to audition and open to and excited about auditioning folks of any identity for all roles. And having public auditions, period, because I know that there are some companies who just want to work with their core group or hand select, and we are pretty committed to having public auditions to get, again, more folks in the room. And with the backstage folks, to be completely honest, it is rare that we're rehiring because we kind of do have a small dream team, or a small team of queer get us who are part of the family, and they are my go-tos first. And if they can't do a project, then I ask them for recommendations as a starting place, because they get it. And then if their recommendations don't work out, which is kind of like with the recent stage manager, it's the first time I've had to hire a stage manager that I didn't know in years. Then we go to, posting the job again, like explaining what the show is about, what the company is about. Like if you read, you have to be comfortable with this. You have to be on board with what we're all about. And in those interviews, it's a lot about, tell me about your experience theatrically, but talking about who we are, what we're doing, what is your experience with these topics, with, like I mentioned earlier, with that stage manager question. There are a lot of queer and trans artists involved in this show. What is your experience working with that community? And just kind of going from there, and a lot of following instincts.
Where do you post? Like, is there anywhere maybe more unusual than a typical circuit that you would go to?
We email, so we have like email to our list of whatever, 2,000-3,000, and then Facebook, and
Sometimes the playlist.
and Minnesota playlist. Sometimes there will be directed emails to theater departments and local schools, because a huge part of 20%'s mission is focusing on emerging artists. So we often would prioritize someone with less experience so that we can help them gain more experience. So I'll do that a lot, kind of send to a list that I have, and they forward it on. That's kind of it.
Hector, Marcel, anything else to add for you? As you're more on the performing side, but maybe for your perspective, have you been in spaces where most of the people behind the scenes were queer, and did it make a difference? Was it special?
20% theater.
We're just gonna make this
I'm working, so I do a lot of burlesque, and that space is a predominantly queer space now. It's not how it started, and I think that what I am seeing now for people who are new to the idea of burlesque or young and haven't studied the history, they have this assumption that queerness and burlesque are somehow like inherently tied together, and that's like not the case. We're very fortunate in Minneapolis specifically to have an integrated community between drag and burlesque, between queer performance art and burlesque. I work very adamantly to help foster that exchange, try to bring burlesque and drag artists into a queer performance art space, or queer performance artists into a burlesque and drag setting. I think that there's some useful exchange there in terms of like aesthetic versus content, whatever, production value versus intention. That space is a space that is predominantly occupied here by queer cis women, which is sometimes really lovely and sometimes really shitty. And I have to say the Minneapolis community, for the most part, has been pretty quick on the upkeep, on the uptake, whatever that expression is, is willing to learn and willing to listen. But it's hard. It's hard when you're dealing with a community really strong in their solidarity, and who is an oppressed party, but it's hard. It's hard to go backstage at a burlesque show and someone's like, oh, like, I brought pussy hats for everybody from the Women's March, and you're like, yikes, like, I feel super included right now in this, like, white gender essentialism. Like, I don't have a vagina, and if I did, it would not be pink, so, like, this is not for me. We're all women, and we're doing burlesque. So, again, back to the question of, is it inherently safe? It's not always inherently safe, that just because you're working with queer people, or just because you're working with women, just because you're working with people, brown people, black people, Hispanic people, Latinx people, like, there's rampant homophobia and machismo within those communities, there's a risk, there's always a risk. 20% does a great job. Patrick's, for the most part, does a good job. Yeah.
I guess I just would add to our listeners out there is just be more sensitive. Just because, I mean, I've been hired to do many performances or many theater gigs just because I wasn't white. And then I would show up to these gigs and it'd just be awkward because I was kind of treated like a token. So for me, I guess I just want to say, I mean, it's if you're gonna hire queer people, hire people of color, don't make them the token and actually be more sensitive and just hear them out. If they have concerns, then listen to them. Communicate.
Yeah.
Communication is key. I say that a lot lately.
And yes,
Communication
like
is key.
listening is key, non-performative listening.
Right.
Not this like, I'm listening, go ahead, you know, but like ready to rebut. Or like, yeah, be actually listening. Ask yourself, if you're a director, ask yourself, if I were a part of this community and I read this, how do I think I feel? Or how would I feel if I were going somewhere and I didn't get to be a part of something because of my whatever? And the farther removed you are from that experience, the harder it is to do that, definitely. But and again, I go back to that Shakespeare production. I've always wanted to be Titania. It's my dream. I know the monologues. I was Oberon in middle school, and I didn't want to be. You know, and I'm like, I don't want to be Titania in some like weird gay version of Midsummer. I don't want to be Titania, and it's like a whole point about transness. I just want to be Titania.
Yeah.
Period. Point blank. And if I wish that I felt the confidence in the show. I wish that I felt like safe going into a space and handing them my resume and saying, my name is Marcel, not Marcella. I get that a lot. Marcel. And here's my monologue. Here's Act 2, Scene 1. And judge it based on the words that are coming out of my mouth and the expressions on my face, not what you think may or may not be in my pants. Or but I really wanted to have it be about like gay, whatever. The language of an audition is important.
I keep going back to the having to do the work idea, because I'm remembering like when we just started, we were a couple of years in 2008, we were doing the first play we ever did that had a trans character. And here I am, relatively new to this city, with oodles of trans friends and exes and whatnots, like in Massachusetts, like lovers, whatever, all of it. And but like nobody here knows that I have this experience, this knowledge, this sensitivity, as much as I could in that moment. And putting an audition posting out in all the wrong places, like having no idea where to look for this one trans male character, and not knowing any trans people yet here. So I figured there's like, I don't know if anyone remembers Yahoo groups.
Yes! The Regina Spektor songbook Yahoo group, I'm still in it!
But like, I discovered that there was a trans Yahoo group, and I figured out a way to like post a thing, and then these people would email me some questions, and I think I had 3 guys audition. One of them was perfect, and I cast him, and then he became my best friend for like 6 years and was in a bunch of other shows and directed for us and did all these things for us. And then he brought people, and then the show brought people, and how I advertised, and the organizations that I met with brought people. And but like doing that initial thing and so much more after is so hard. There was so much work. So I'm thinking about organizations that don't have our mission, but that still have an interest, or that like want to get more LGBTQ folks involved, or that want to open the door and they don't know how. I just keep thinking like, okay, well, it takes, 9 years ago? It takes time. And you pick a really good show and you vet that show. You email that show to some people that you know, the script, I mean. And that's another thing we do. I mean, we receive sometimes up to 20 scripts a month. And they have to be accompanied by a script submission form, which I do read. And if it sounds like nothing we would ever do, I just delete that email. And if it sounds like it could possibly have potential, it goes to a group of readers, and they get paid for everyone that they review. because we pay every single person who's ever worked for us ever.
This is a huge
And-
note to me because you pay a bunch of people to read these works, and you could just keep that money, and you don't. You pay people to read the work.
And they have a rating scale and a review sheet and everything, and so if a play gets, several people giving it 4 or 5, then it goes into the Claire needs to read this someday pile. But still, there's work, and you need to have the good intentions, and I have had a million good intentions where I've done the wrong thing. You have to have those intentions, and then you have to start there and think like, okay, I can't just do this for me. I can't just do this because I think this is the right thing right now. I have this thought. Like, we just finished the selection process for the Naked Eye. We had 83 submissions. We chose 21 that will be staged, really short pieces this winter. And that went out to a committee of 12. And of course I read it too, because why wouldn't I? But the majority of the pieces focus on trans experience, which is not my experience. As a reader, I have my preferences, and there are plenty of pieces that I love that no one else did. And that is okay, because it's not for me. It's not my show. And I am so grateful that I had all these readers to be like, no, this is important right now. This is a story that needs to be heard. This is my experience that hasn't been staged before. And it's an honor to have that. But doing that work is important. And we just started doing that kind of review committee stuff 4 years ago.
Wow.
So, that was too late. But at least we're doing it.
There's a thing that you say, I don't know if it's always in an email, but it was the first time I read something for 20%, it said, listen to your biases. They're there for a reason. And that, I had never been granted that permission in my entire life. I had never been told that it was okay to feel preferential to trans stories or stories about artists of color. Hadn't crossed my mind.
That's very helpful. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Gina, do you have any? I have a million questions. I can keep going.
Yeah, I just want to be, what time are we at? Because I want to make sure
We're
we're
at 8:40. So we can do, does the audience have questions? We can open it up.
Sorry if we didn't get to all of them.
You guys have time?
No, it's
this is
I
just
do
back
have a
up.
question
Don't worry
if
about it.
the audience doesn't have one. So this is on my mind because I'm going to be talking to an audience of young adults, high schoolers on Friday. What advice would you give to young queer performers entering into this world, especially given the anxieties in our current political system and news with Kevin Spacey being a dick, those kind of things? I'm just thinking about what I'm going to say to these students, so maybe I'm looking for encouragement.
I would just say, keep doing what you're doing. Just put yourself out there. It's scary, but that's how you're going to get ahead, is just put yourself out there. Mm-hmm. My mom told me something actually really cute today. She said, if it doesn't scare you, then what's the point?
Arm yourself
Yeah.
with knowledge.
Yeah.
Prepare yourself for everything, for any of the things that might get thrown at you. If you're going to take a stance, read about it, be prepared to back yourself up, because people will challenge you.
What do you do about tolerance for people? I'm very involved in the DFL. I'm on my Senate district, I'm a commissioner, and I'm a precinct chair. And I know a lot of people of goodwill with, really with the values of tolerance and inclusion, and who have never heard, and have no idea if you said this person is non-binary. They'll have no idea what you're talking about. And how do you create alliances with people who are willing to listen and want to know without, because, I understand people are wounded.
Yeah.
And so, and these people are going to, people I'm thinking of, they're going to say things that might hurt without even knowing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So how do you cross that divide? How do you create conversation? What are the...
It's hard. This is something that I deal with, we deal with
All the time.
every day. Every day. I think there is a misconception that social justice warriors want to get into these altercations and are like eager to have these conversations. It's horrifying. It's not fun. You're filled with all of this anxiety and fear about retaliation, and also like the power in that scenario. The power is not in my hands. You know, I am simultaneously being wounded and have to figure out how to navigate my pain and monitor my tone so as to approach this person in a way that does not turn them off.
Right.
So I would say to the then also to prepare that resolve. Because as much as I would love to say the onus is on that person to go and do their own research and look up these resources and whatever, at the end of the day, when that conversation happens, I'm the person that they're dealing with. I'm the one-on-one. I'm the face. And just as you cannot remove yourself from the fact that you work at the Guthrie, I cannot remove myself. Do I speak for all trans people? Do I speak for all people of color? No, but I am one.
And I would challenge you and say that, I feel like the onus is on us. If you don't identify as non-binary and there are people in your life who don't get it, to me, I've just decided I have to start making them get it.
Yeah.
And not having my godson
You have to be an
try to
ally.
explain that.
Yeah.
Yep. That's, and that you don't get to say you're an ally. You have to do ally. Like you have to do the fucking work and be the person to
To do the work.
to step in and say, oh, you know, it's not that person's job to explain their identity to you, but why don't we talk about it?
And and for me, it was find the language for myself that I thought people could meet me at. If people understand that if I'm going to put myself in a category, I put myself in a category of bi. And so if I have people in my life now that can say, I understand sexuality is fluid, and I say, then take that, apply it to gender.
Yeah.
And I know for people my age and older,
That helps.
that is a radical concept. But I say, but if you have done it with sexuality, just like give it a go, give it a try. And so that's how I've been approaching it in terms of trying to, how do you have those conversations? I had to try to put it into terms that I could explain. Because to your point, if you're gonna make an argument, people are gonna challenge you on it, like it has to make sense to you, for lack of a better way to say that. So I do think it's on allies to be that intermediary.
But what if they're not identifying as allies, but they're just people who are willing to listen? I mean, it's not a tag ally that they're claiming, it's more,
But we're
I'm just thinking about-
we're the ally. If you're in this room, you're probably the ally.
It would be the hope.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know, I just see a lot of, I'm always thinking in terms of the worry is because of where we're at politically in reality, and we have Trump as president, and about, how are we ever going to get out of our bubbles and make change happen, massive change happen, because,
Having the conversations, not shutting them down, not silencing people who want to have those conversations is a great start.
Making the bubble bigger, including all of us.
In my
including
Facebook,
everyone.
I'm sorry, go ahead. In my Facebook memories, I think today came up a post I had done, I think it was 5 years ago, the election for the marriage amendment. No, to be in the Constitution to not allow same-gender marriage.
right,
I think 5 years ago, and how, we went from trying to get it in the Constitution, that the year we voted no, to what was happening, and then the very next year, gay marriage, and then here we are. I know in the moment, it feels like Trump is president, and we're just trying to make sure that we're not there, and it feels slow at times, and there are fights happening, and I think, 5 years ago, I've been meaning to fix my front step for 5 years, and now I'm legally married. Like, how did that happen? And so at times it feels like all of that is happening if we keep the conversation
well,
open,
except that the
going.
reason we needed the human rights the HRC and that so many of us worked for to fight for no is because people didn't vote in those midterms, and we got a Republican legislature, a very rightist Republican legislature that wanted to define marriage as between a man and a woman. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had to struggle against the amendment.
Yeah, but I
Because people
think
didn't vote.
a point that is perhaps being lost here is look at how wrong we were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago that you could not get the Democratic nomination if you were in support of gay marriage. That's my lifetime.
Yeah.
You know? Look at how wrong we were. Look at how long ago it was that you couldn't go buy a dildo. Look at how long ago it was that we could not be in the same room together or be in a show together, or I would be in the show and I'd have to go eat in the back after. That was my grandparents. That's not a long time ago. These people are still alive and still working today. And so when people say, like, I just don't get it, or like, oh, we're moving so quick. And if you are not willing to consider that you might be wrong, or that that something that you knew to be true, to be a capital F fact and be beholden to you, can be wrong, that's not about your age, that's not about your race, that's about your willingness to receive alternative viewpoints. It's about you as a person and your ability to listen to someone saying something that you don't like or you don't agree with. Now that can, of course, be informed by your race or by your gender. If you are a woman and you have spent your whole life being spoken over, perhaps you are more inclined to sit silently. If you are a man and everyone has just made space for you to speak your whole life, these things can inform. But there are gay people who are not ready to talk about people being gender non-binary. It's not just about that. It's about your ability to be willing to receive an opposing viewpoint.
Yeah, and I just was talking about the nature of discourse and the nature of educating and of communicating, really, as you said.
Yeah.
So I think something maybe to steer it back a little bit to theater, since that was how we were just putting back.
We were talking about, you mentioned our gentle audience that are listening later. But I was kind of thinking, what recommendations do you have for artists, playwrights that are wanting to create new works? Wanting to be, not only to respect the fact that we're wanting to create shows where everyone has a normal representation, and it's not like, oh, let's highlight the difference of this person, but bringing people in and creating. For me, I'm a bit of a realist when I write. Like, I love creating life, I love creating interactions with people and just building relationship. And for those that are interested in wanting to create new works, very inclusive new works, what recommendations do you have, or what are you kind of looking for, either in the production aspect or as a performer, or in the various areas of performance that you have? What are you looking for in new works, or what do you recommend for those that are creating new works?
That's hard.
And I know it's a big thing, but kind of what are some of the things?
For me, and it goes back to the whole straight actors playing gay characters as like caricatures. I feel like for me, my hopes for like future plays is that you make sure that the characters and you make sure that the stories, it's human. That just, you have to remember that whoever you're writing about, whoever this character may be, whatever the subject is it's a human story. I guess it's the easier way than saying normal, because I hate the word normal. It is a bad word, so just human. Just make sure that it's human.
Talk to people that aren't you. I think Meryl Streep said that someone was like, describe your job. She was talking to Kushner about this Mother Courage they were doing. She was like, I'm the voice of ghosts. I'm the voice of dead people. And I loved that, because I think that whether as a playwright you are writing a character that is based pretty specifically on a person or an amalgamation of two people, or you think that you're like inventing a person, which is actually just made up of millions of tiny parts of people. You know, we're telling stories of ghosts. We're telling stories of a collective dialogue that's happening in the earth. And if you are writing about characters that are not like you, talk to people that are like those characters and listen to what they have to say. Pass it, give it to your friends. Give it to your friends. If you are going to if you're writing a play about trans people and you're not trans, and you go to a trans person and you say, well, you like proofread this for me, pay them. People come to me and they say, hey, I want to run something by you, is it racist? And I'm like, here's my PayPal, $50. Like, this is my consultation fee, you know? And perpetuity is important to me. Perpetuity is something, and maybe that's stepping away from your question a little bit specifically on the subject of playwriting, but if you're a theater maker, if you're on the production side, anything you can do to foster more work, like this Q stage we're doing, you're given an hour, and it is my intention not to present an hour-long presentation. It is my intention to present a workshop that can then be taken and expanded upon, because it is my hope that that will create further employment opportunities for queer and trans actors, and that work can then have a life beyond me, perhaps even beyond this town, and other queer and trans actors, directors, lighting designers, whoever can participate in that work. So if you can, if you're in the place in your career looking beyond just the immediate thing is useful, I think.
I'd say a lot of what she said. In that, like, if you're in love with the idea of a character that is of a particular identity that is less familiar to you, that's okay, follow that instinct, but then, yeah, definitely vet it with folks who do identify with that character's identity, and just, yeah, look for that feedback, and research, and like Hector said, make sure that it's human interactions, it's not stereotyping, it's not, yeah.
But also, like,
It's hard.
I don't idolize, you know, like, I don't want us to always be the villain, but I don't want to be put on a pedestal either, because I know a lot of shitty trans people. There are a lot of people that don't like me, you know, like, we're nuanced. Everybody is complicated.
If you write a play about a big Mexican, please idolize them.
You're a monster.
I am a monster. I'm totally joking, that was just really funny.
Can I ask that question about audiences too? So how do we cultivate audiences that are willing to try going to new plays versus plays that they're more familiar with?
That was literally my question.
Yeah.
So my mind.
Yeah.
That's a really hard question.
It's hard for me to get my friends to come with me to something weird. Or
Right, well, see, that's the thing with, like, when I did the Big Gay Mexican show with 20% theater, I was disappointed that the majority of my audience was white. So, and it's like, well, how do I get the Latinx community to come see my work? Still trying to figure that out, you know? So it's an ongoing struggle, but I'm doing research. I'm doing work, you know, I'm doing the work to looking at other theater companies, looking at ways that they bring diversity to their theaters, and hopefully, you know, use those tactics for my work.
Yeah, and then it's a question of, what are you, a company? Are you an individual artist? Do you have an outreach? Do you have a community department? You know, like, it's harder if you're an independent artist, I think, and you don't have like a team or maybe a lot of resources. If you're looking at your demographics and you want to have different demographics, but you don't have a foot in that community. What, you show up at your local Y because you want some teenagers, you show up at a Mexican restaurant because you want some Mexican, like, where do you go? You know, like, how do you engage in communities that you are not a part of because you want to engage them in your work? I don't know. I don't have an answer.
it's really fascinating. Earlier you mentioned something about how we're all part of the theater community. I actually don't feel part of the theater community. I feel like 20% exists in the theater community, but it's not part of it. In previous years, when we have done what I would call a straight play, which is a main stage full-length play with zero queer content, we haven't done one of those in a long time. Those plays would pack with Star Tribune attention and predominantly old white people, and they would love those plays. But those are not the plays that made us happy. So our audiences are predominantly non-theater goers, who will pretty much only come to our kind of stuff, or maybe some of the other performance.
And they come from all over, from the tri-state area.
All over the Midwest.
Yeah.
And a lot of queer and trans folks and a lot of straight cis folks, but they are not theater goers. They might be like experimental work likers. And then fellow artists.
Yeah.
Because I feel like the folks that we employ support each other. And it is very, very rare, extremely rare, that I will see another person from the theater community in our audience.
I was really sad, I have to say, when we did the partnership with the Minnesota Museum of American Art, and the Star Tribune said this is one of the 5 things that you should see this weekend, and we had like 20 people in the audience. I was heartbroken that this work by trans artists, and not because of my own ego, not because I was the performer, but because it was a major work, and the Star Tribune said, come and see this work, and this artist flew in from Seattle, and I spent months preparing this work about the death of a trans woman of color. On the heels of, the day after I said yes to this, an attempt on my life was made in the streets of Minneapolis. And so I like stood up, right? I was like so terrified, and my partner was like, you don't have to do this. And I was like, no, like now is like, look, if not now, when? Oh my goodness, ride the fear, like. And then like 20 people came. It was our audience, it was my fan base, the people that come to all my shows. You know, like, so how do you engage
So it's
them?
really hard because I feel very alone in that the theater goers think what we do is not for them. It's too weird. It's too new. Those are about people I don't care about, or it's like they put us in a box, and that's what we fight to get out of.
Or maybe are afraid. Maybe
Or
are
very
afraid of some sort of confrontation.
Yeah. So then there's many attempts to try to like reach back out to get like the regular theater going crowd to attend something, or with advertisements where they read ads, or to reach out to schools and other communities, but we do pretty well, so I'm not complaining that much.
Well, we hit 9 o'clock. I wanted to try to end this on a positive note, but we can all say beautiful things to each other now that we're going to wrap it up. We gotta get out of here so Sandbox can have their theater back. But thank you all so much for coming. When is the date of our next one?
It's like November 29th.
29th,
Yeah. It'll be
yeah.
on mental health.
health.
Yes.
So something very near and dear to my heart. So looking very forward to that one. Before we go, do you three want to go around and talk about what you have coming up next for you and your work?
Yeah, Daddy is
amazing.
Is the second Thursday of every month at the Ice House. We've sold out every show. Get your tickets in advance. I'll be at Black Arts Burlesque on November 24th. We have the Terra Fantastic combo package. The Crane at the Crane Theater.
20%'s next show is the Terra Fantastic at the world premiere. Speaking of mental illness, about a young gay woman with severe anxiety, who's a fantasy erotica writer, and processes a lot of her anxiety disorder through the audience getting to see some of what she writes come to life. You're in it.
I play the evil queen. Come see me do my best Norma Desmond.
December 1st through the 16th.
I will be there.
Awesome.
November 19th at 7:30, I'll be doing Mother Goose Bedtime Stories at, I think it's still at the Seward Cafe. They might change the venue, but I think for now it's still there. I'll just be presenting just one of my pieces for them, so very exciting.
We also have the Naked Eye coming up next year in the February.
February, yeah, beginning of February, auditions, we need like 20 performers. Auditions will be beginning of February, or beginning of December rather.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much again. This was wonderful.